Hello friends, this video on organisms and their surroundings part 1 is brought to you by examfear.com. No more fear from exam. Topics to be covered in this lesson are introduction, variety of organisms, habitat, biotic and abiotic components of a habitat, terrestrial habitats wherein we will talk about deserts, mountains and grasslands, aquatic habitats wherein we will discuss oceans, ponds and lakes, living things around us wherein we'll talk about dependence on food, growth, respiration, response to stimulus, reproduction and movement. Organisms. The term gives us a thought of the huge variety of living as well as non-living things that we see around us. Now, the term organisms or the term living organisms mostly speak about the huge variety of living things around us. These living things could be some huge animals like elephants, lions or tigers. It could also be tiny organisms like bacteria or worms or insects. So, living organisms exist in a huge variety of sizes, in huge variety of forms, in many different places as well. Like some of them might be huge, they might be very large, while some others can be very, very small. Some might live in forests while others might live in water. So if you compare the wild animals like lions, tigers, elephants, giraffe, they all live in forest. Whereas if you compare, if you think of fishes or the aquatic plants, they live in water. Some of them might live in the air. Example, birds, they spend most of their time in the air, while others might live in the soil. So there exists a huge range of organisms, tiny insects, tiny worms, like one best example would be earthworm, and there are many such creatures who live in the soil, who live inside the soil. So when we talk about organisms, rather when we talk about living organisms, we can find a lot of them in our vicinity as well. So in fact, if you go to your garden, you can find a lot of them in your garden itself. Now let us look at different living organisms that we see in different surroundings. Now, even before we move ahead to some external surroundings, let us think of our houses. Even inside our house, no matter how much ever clean you keep your house, you tend to find other organisms. So, of course, we are ourselves living organisms, but besides us, we also see other creatures. For example, a wall lizard. It's a very common organism which is seen in the houses. Or you think of a mosquito or a spider, which is very commonly seen inside the house. You think of mosquitoes which bites us and it gives real pain. So mosquitoes, lizards, spiders, these are all organisms which are seen in very near vicinity. They are seen inside our houses. So not only these, if you think of external surroundings, if you go out of your house and if you try to visit a forest, you see huge number of trees. That is one thing that differentiates forests from other places. Like when you look at your house, you might see furnitures, television, refrigerator, dining table, sofa, etc. But even in that environment, you could see some other organisms like lizard or spider or mosquitoes. Now when you go to a forest which is like full of trees, greenery everywhere. Now in this huge abundance of trees and water, a huge number of animals as well as birds survive there. So you have huge animals like elephant, lion, tiger, giraffe. You have smaller animals like deer or goats or monkeys. You have very tiny organisms like insects, worms, birds. So you see huge variety of living organisms in the forest. Again, if you go to some other type of surrounding, maybe a desert, what would you see in a desert? So there the environment is quite different. The climatic condition is quite different than what it is in the forest. So in forest we see huge number of trees, whereas when you go to the desert, you do not see that many trees. So it has less trees because it is full of sand. It doesn't have the wet soil. Therefore, it doesn't support growth of lot of plants. However, you see some plants like cactus which can easily grow there, because there are certain special plants which can grow even with lesser amount of water. So those type of plants are seen in desert. So anyways, the number of plants are very less in desert. If you look at the climatic conditions, they have very hot and dry days, but it is very cold at night. So the kind of living organisms which we see there are like camels or the cactus plants. Now all the living organisms who can survive with less water, who can survive the extreme heat and the extreme cold nights, so only those organisms will be able to live in that kind of climatic conditions. So therefore in deserts we see a very different set of organisms than forests. Again, if you think of a polar region, the polar regions, those regions, if you look at the globe, the topmost and the bottommost regions, the two tops, they are basically the polar regions where it is extremely cold. So it is so cold out there that it is covered with snow throughout the year. It is always covered with snow. Now, do you think that all organisms are capable of surviving in that extreme cold? No, of course not. Even if you think of us human beings, whenever it is like winter time, we tend to wear a lot of sweaters, jackets, etc. But as the temperature keeps decreasing during winter season, what happens? It becomes difficult for us to adapt to that decreasing temperature. Now when you go to these regions, maybe people might go there for a couple of hours or a couple of days, but they cannot survive there for a longer period of time because it is extremely cold there. However, there are certain set of organisms who are very much comfortable surviving there. So one such example is the polar bear. So polar bear, they very comfortably survive there. Their body structure is such that they can adapt to that climate. For example, if you look at their skin is covered, they have a layer of fat, and that layer of fat provides them warmth. They also have the fur over their skin. That fur also is like a jacket which we wear. So that is like a natural jacket for them, which again provides them warmth. They have very small ears, because of which they do not lose a lot of heat. So they try to keep their body as much hot as possible. So it tries to keep the heat inside its body. So there are a lot of adaptations with these polar bears, because of which they can survive in these kind of extreme cold climates. Again, when you look at the sea, the ocean, it is like water everywhere, and inside the sea we again have a huge variety of living organisms. Whether you talk about fishes, both small and big, you talk about aquatic plants, you talk about other tiny organisms. So there are a huge variety of organisms like jellyfish, hydra, fishes, aquatic plants who live in the sea. Now again, when we talk about sea, now as we all know that sea water has high salt content. Therefore, there are certain aquatic organisms which can survive only in salty water, whereas there are certain other organisms which can survive only in non-salty water. So therefore, you would see that the types of fishes who survive in the sea, they do not survive in ponds or lakes. Similarly, the ones which survive in the ponds and lakes, they do not survive in the sea. So that means there are a couple of adaptations of different organisms based on which they choose different areas to live. Now here we looked at some very contrasting surroundings. So sometimes we talked about forest, sometimes desert, sometimes polar regions, sometimes sea. So they are all very much different from each other, but everywhere we see that we get to find a huge variety of organisms. So no matter how much ever adverse the conditions seem to be, but those conditions are also favorable to certain set of organisms. Thank you. Please visit www.examfear.com to watch more educational videos with a better experience. Please do not forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for latest updates. Thank you once again.